Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. South Africa has asked the International Court of Justice to order Israel to stop its Gaza offensive, and it also said that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian civilians. Now, this particular demand came at the closing of the first day of the hearing at the International Court of Justice of the case brought by South Africa against Israel. Now, Israel in this particular case will be responding to the allegations brought in by South Africa on Friday. Today, the descriptions which were put forth by the representatives of the South African side lasted for almost 3 hours. Many nations, including Pakistan, have backed this particular move made by South Africa. Now, all eyes are set as to what happens during the course of the proceedings at the International Court of Justice regarding this particular suit brought in by South Africa, accusing Israel of committing genocide inside Gaza. Now, when this particular suit was brought in by South Africa, the International Court of Justice on its website had said, let me quote, that South Africa seeks to found the court's jurisdiction on Article 36, paragraph 1 of the statute of the court and on Article 9 of the Genocide Convention, to which both South Africa and Israel are parties. The application also contains a request for the indication of provisional measures pursuant to the Article 41 of the statute of the court and Article 73, 74 and 75 of the rules of the court, unquote. Meanwhile, we have seen Gaza's health ministry has said, due to indiscriminate and continuous Israeli bombardment and ground invasion in the besieged Gaza Strip, the death toll has risen to 23,469 and 59,604 people have been injured as a result of this brutality by Israel. We'll be focusing on the course of the proceedings at the International Court of Justice, as there is a suit brought in by South Africa. What happens to the jurisdiction of International Court of Justice and what we would be expecting from Israel's response tomorrow, and also the likelihood of what could be the outcome of this particular proceeding at the end of the case. And also we'll be bringing into the discussion the relevant articles of the rules of the court as well as the statute of International Court of Justice that have been mentioned by South Africa in its particular application of the suit. We'll be taking understanding about all these aspects. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Shabana Fayyaz. She is expert international relations. Dr. Shabana, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we're honored to have been joined by Ambassador Naela Chohan, happens to be former ambassador and Special Secretary of Foreign Affairs, retired. Ms. Naela, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by another participant. I'll be introducing him as he joins in. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Shabana. Now, let's start with the significance of this particular case. Multiple media reports suggest there are a lot of views when you talk about the people and historians in particular who are following this particular, have been following the International Court of Justice, and the cases brought in at the International Court of Justice are of the view, have the unanimity of the vision that this is one of the very important, the gruesome kind of cases that have been brought at this particular forum. What happens with the significance and what is the jurisdiction? How is the jurisdiction evaluated when it comes to such contentious cases?
Thank you so much. Very, very critical question you have posed. I think coming off from South Africa as a case against the Israel, to some people it looks like a surprise, but I feel it is not a surprise because the relation or the parallels between the apartheid and the Palestinian cause have gone a long way back. And we all know that how in case of South Africa, the minority was ruled, black minority was ruled by the white minority. And of course there have been racial discrimination, and there was, and in 19th earlies, we all know how the National Congress came into power, and the whole ceasefire, and both the Israel and South Africa are also signatory to the later on 90s Genocide Convention. So they technically they are bound. Now the big debate is that the significance is it really clearly shows that we all know that world opinion, the citizen opinions are against what is being carried out, the gruesome loss of humanity and the lives in the name of the self-defense by the Israelis. So this movement, the worldwide movement of the citizens and also the statesmen, has seen the best reflection in the way of again confiding trust in the UN bodies, that is the International Court of Justice, and to go there and and appeal and to restrain the Israel from further his gruesome acts and calling for the ceasefire. Now what they can do? The ICJ, International Court of Justice, is a verified, is a recognized UN agency, an organization, very old, that has to deal with the conflict resolution and has the capacity technically to restrain the state and even order the states who are act of conflict to stop it and go for a peace negotiations and sort of the deals. What happens is that if they rule against Israel, there have been the ruling against in 2000s earlier against the Russia, with the because of the operations and the conflict going on in case of the Ukraine. UN does not have a force, nor does the ICJ. So the ruling will be a clear message that the highest International Court of Justice, recognized by all the states, is against what is being carried out by the Israel. Whether it will materialize on ground depends on the will of the state that is involved in such acts.
Right. Let me proceed to Ambassador Naela Chohan also. Ambassador Naela, when we talk about the jurisdiction, we have seen at the website of this particular International Court of Justice, which also mentions about this particular suit that has been brought by South Africa, talks about the jurisdiction that South Africa seeks to found the court's jurisdiction on Article 36, paragraph 1 of the statute of the court and Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. So specifically talking about the Article 36 of the statute of the International Court of Justice. What happens and when this particular jurisdiction comes into play, and regarding this particular admissibility of this sort of a suit that has been brought in by a certain party, which happens to be the party to the Convention on Genocide also, against a party which is also the member of that particular Genocide Convention. Your understanding regarding that?
This is a very pertinent question, because both the countries are, Israel is not, I mean, it's a, has a special status, but South Africa and Israel are signatories of the Genocide Convention. Now, as Dr. Shabana said, ICJ will now deliberate from, today and tomorrow, on whether it has jurisdiction. It might also be borne in mind that ICJ has a long panel of judges from different countries, and each has that, although if you have seen the deliberation, that it was stated that no judge from Israel or South Africa will be part of the panel, so that it is unbiased. But that doesn't mean that it will be unbiased, because there may be judges with different affiliations and backgrounds.
So in that case, when you talk about the highest seat globally of justice, ideally what should be the principle on which that particular decision which might be coming regarding this, whether finalizing there happens to be a jurisdiction, and if yes, and what happens to be the result of that particular proceeding that goes on?
You see, there's a difference between idealism and realism. Like Judge Donahoe is of Jewish origin and American. So there are talks about what will be her role on the panel. So how does the panel come to a decision? Firstly, on the jurisdiction. The proceedings might take years. So let's not be idealistic about it, that these 2 weeks they will look at it and it will be decided. It will not be decided.
But
what they will decide,
preliminary arguments by both the sides,
yes,
the oral arguments which have been presented by the representatives of South Africa today, and there is going to be an oral response by the Israeli side also. After these oral arguments have been made at the International Court of Justice, shouldn't there be naturally the decision regarding as to the International Court of Justice whether holds the jurisdiction in this
Exactly.
particular matter or not.
Exactly.
And then a proceeding might take
Yes.
as much as time as it requires.
Indeed, that's exactly correct. That at this moment the deliberation would be on the jurisdiction. Once the jurisdiction is confirmed, then they will go into.
So what does the International Court of Justice's statute, especially that article, that 36 in paragraph 1 that has been referred to by ICJ itself on its website, as per the application brought in by South Africa, what does that actually talk about?
That talks about basically that, they're both signatories to the Genocide Convention. Actually, there are 153 countries that are signatories of the Genocide Convention, and in that context, how ICJ is going to deliberate on this case and determine whether it has the jurisdiction or not. But the interesting thing is that once that is confirmed, and if you follow the international reports, a lot of international lawyers are saying that South Africa is likely to win. Now, once it wins, the question is what then? And like Dr. Shabana said, that neither UN nor ICJ have the instrument for implementation, number one. But it will bring pressure on the UN Security Council, where the resolutions had been debated and vetoed, and then after that the UN Secretary General invoked Article 99, under which that resolution had gone to UNGA.
Would that be the case? Because we have seen an overwhelming majority of the United Nations General Assembly also
Yes.
Voting in favor of that particular resolution,
Indeed.
with only 10 countries going against. I'll take your detailed view regarding that one. We get
Definitely.
honored to have been joined by another participant on Skype, Mr. Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Mr. Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Chaudhry, what's your understanding, first of all, the significance of this particular suit that has been brought in by South Africa? That particular move made by South Africa has been backed and welcomed by Organization of Islamic Cooperation, as well as many nations, including Pakistan as well. Now, first of all, the significance of this particular case to be brought at the level of International Court of Justice, and secondly, the jurisdiction, whether the ICJ actually holds any sort of jurisdiction to such suits which are brought to it.
Well, ICJ can always give its opinion, and as I was hearing Ambassador Naela Chohan saying, it has its own weight. It may not be binding on Israel, because Israel has been rejecting resolutions, even that of the UN Security Council, which had been calling for a two-state solution for a long time, but Israel has been violating that. So therefore, the pressure already is mounting, and I think this move by South Africa, I must commend that country, because what they suffered, kind of apartheid, I think they can see the same happening in Palestine, where Israeli occupying forces are doing exactly what the white apartheid regime had done in South Africa. So it's a very welcome move, because it has that weight, moral weight. But I believe there could have been so many other things also that could have and should have been done. After all, 153 countries had supported the Palestinian right to self-determination and had also called for a ceasefire. Many of these nations, I believe, should have gone on to the second step of cutting off their diplomatic ties. That would have exerted a big pressure. Some of the Muslim countries should have even gone on to some commercial boycotts of certain Israeli products. That could have also affected. But nevertheless, since that has not happened, and Israel continues to receive unqualified support from the United States, it hasn't really come under that kind of pressure. So ICJ move, in a way, is a good move, because that will also contribute to adding further pressure on Israel. My own sense is that all this pressure will work on two levels. One, of course, with the United States, which has now becoming convinced that the greater Israel is not happening. These Palestinians will not move to Egypt, Jordan, or other states. I think it has become very clear to it. The second is the Israel itself, because within Israel, Netanyahu is no longer a popular prime minister. Businesses are moving out, people are moving out, and I think it's only a matter of time before Netanyahu's right-wing government falls. So one hopes that that happens sooner than later.
Mr. Chaudhry, Ambassador Chaudhry, when we talk about this particular suit that has been brought in by South Africa, now the ICJ says that South Africa seeks to found the court's jurisdiction on Article 36, Paragraph 1 of the Statute of the Court on Article 9 of the Genocide Conventions when it comes to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to such contentious matters. After we see the response coming from Israel tomorrow regarding these allegations, what could be the likelihood? Do you expect this suit being admissible at the International Court of Justice?
If we go by the precedents, ICJ's jurisdiction has to be accepted by both parties in order for the case to be admitted. That is why every time, I think there are about 3 or 4 times Pakistan went to ICJ, it was only on jurisdiction grounds that our case never made it to the next stage. And it was only in the case of consular access to Kulbhushan Jadhav that the case was heard, because both parties were ready to talk about it. So I think it could go either way. It might be just cut off the roster because of the jurisdiction issue. But advisory opinion can always be given, because that has been done earlier. If you recall, in the case of Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence, ICJ gave an advisory opinion. Even on construction of wall in Palestine, in Jerusalem, I think advisory opinion was given. So I don't know whether Israelis would actually agree to fight the case in ICJ. I doubt that, but let's see how it goes.
So Mr. Chaudhry, the Article 41 of the Statute of the Court and Articles 73, 74 and 75 is also, they have also been mentioned. Now, when we talk specifically about the Article 41, the indication of the provisional measures, presumably if both the parties, none of the parties object to the question of jurisdiction of International Court of Justice to this case, there might be kind of a defense coming from the Israeli side against which this particular case has been brought in, and there doesn't happen to be a question of jurisdiction from them, and the proceedings happen to be admissible at the International Court of Justice, and the case goes ahead. In that case, what about the Article 41 when the South African side asks for indication of the provisional measures? So what those provisional measures could be at the hands of the International Court of Justice in order to stop Israel from carrying out its Gaza offensive?
I don't think much, except that it can refer the matter to UN Security Council, that Israel is guilty of not allowing the ceasefire to happen, or to give the rights of the Palestinians in Gaza. I think that, but still ICJ would not be in a position to impose any penalty. I don't think so. I think they will have to go back to the UN, preferably UN Security Council, to act on that under Chapter 7. But I'm sorry, but this is a legal issue, but this is my sense of the statute.
Right, Mr. Chaudhry, there is another article that has been referred to this particular press statement by International Court of Justice upon receiving this particular suit by South Africa, that happens to be the Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. Now, when we go through this Article 9 of the Genocide Convention, it refers to Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, which says that the following acts shall be punishable. So when it comes to the punishment, there is a list of these acts, genocide being at the top of it, conspiracy to commit genocide happens to be the number second, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. Don't we understand after reading these two particular articles of the Genocide Convention that if genocide is punishable, there would be definitely some sort of measures at the hands of International Court of Justice which it can give out in its ruling?
I think this is precisely the reason why, in my view, Israel would resist this case to be processed in the ICJ. I think they'll do their best because they know that they are guilty and they can be held accountable. Then there is another court. I don't think Israel is party to it. It's the ICC, International Criminal Court, but I think South Africa is party to it. Even if Israel is not a member of the Rome Statute, a member of the ICC, probably it could still be tried. I still don't know, but on ICJ, I don't think it has the jurisdiction over any action by Israel until Israel itself submits to the jurisdiction of ICJ.
Okay, so here is a scenario. Presumably, both the parties submit to the court and there comes a ruling which goes against what Israel had been doing in Gaza since 7th of October. Do you think there would be any sort of an implementation of that ruling? And would there be an instrument or anybody governing that implementation?
I think at the end of the day, it is the moral pressure, diplomatic pressure that will be exerted if this goes in that direction. You see, even the Chapter 7 UN Security Council resolutions have not been able to oblige Israel to do what it must do. You can make all kinds of exhortations and all kinds of judgments. These will eventually add pressure. And as I've indicated, I think two things must happen. One is the action by United States to prevent and stem the hand of Netanyahu, and second, the internal action within Israel to stem the hands of Netanyahu. I think if ICJ moves in that direction and somehow a judgment is passed against Israel, that will add to that pressure a great deal. Keep in mind that United States is also not part of ICJ. It left ICJ, I think, in 1984. It also does not accept the jurisdiction of ICJ. Many countries don't, and therefore you can imagine that US will only be morally persuaded by the ICJ judgment if it goes to that, if it comes to that level, but not legally, because US also doesn't accept its jurisdiction. So at the end of the day, it's the hardcore ground situation that will determine, and hats off to Palestinians because they have said resolutely that we are not going anywhere. We are going to stay right here in our own land, and Israel will also have to, that is my sense, will have to give in.
Right, Mr. Ambassador Chaudhry, one last question. Had there been any sort of a difference, had there been more parties bringing in the suit? We've seen this time South Africa, there's a lot of backing coming from a lot of nations, especially multilateral forums, including the OIC also. Would it had some sort of a different effect on the strength of the case had it been brought by more than one parties?
Well, in legal terms, no. One party is enough. But in moral and diplomatic pressure, yes, of course it matters. But you see, look at UN General Assembly, which under the 2005 communique of the heads of state, which was a sort of reform process of the UN at that time, they had agreed that if genocide happens, then international community has the right to act. That was it's there on the books of the UN. There is a UN General Assembly resolution on that. But 153 countries have supported that, more than 2/3 majority. And yet no action took place because UN or ICJ are not world governments. They don't have the executive power with them. So at the end of the day, it comes down to I think real pressure, and that's why I was indicating that had some of the countries also taken action in cutting off their ties with the US or boycotting with Israel or boycotting some of their products, that would have had much greater impact than these moves that which should be done. I mean, I'm not saying they don't have a weight, they do. And I think based on whatever ICJ then comes out, UN Security Council will be under tremendous pressure to take action on that, and US will be sorely isolated in vetoing that resolution. So within the US, as you know, there is so much of public protests all across the United States that the Biden government is already under pressure. I think it might even influence the forthcoming election in the US. So I think Democratic government led by Biden is under tremendous pressure. And if such a judgment comes, I'm sure they will be even under greater pressure and will have to stop. You know, it asked for $60 billion more for, but it's not getting from the Congress. So US is really, that was of course for Ukraine, but I think the pressures within the US are also emerging that some Israel's heavy-handedness must be checked.
Right, Mr. Ambassador Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Shabana, now Article 41. Now the provisional measures. If the case is finally admissible and the ICJ takes up this case for further proceedings and looking into what kind of ruling comes in later on, what about the provisional measures at the hands of the International Court of Justice? What could those be possibly?
Well, I must say that I'm not a technical expert or a jurist in that regard, but to my knowledge, I can say the provisional measures, number one, is to refrain or to at least convince the aggressor that there is need to have a ceasefire on humanitarian ground. And number two is the supply route, that is the food and medical, and also the basic needs, that is electricity, water and gas. They needs to be restored in that area. The third point mostly is the exchange, that if it goes further is to initiate the trust building measures, and that is basically is that either the UN can have the special envoy for the peace like they had in Afghanistan and otherwise, to engage the parties, at least listen to their grievances if both party agrees.
Is there, do you think that could be a possibility if the United Nations brings in a certain envoy who could sit with both the parties and talk about the grievances? Because the kind of approach the Israeli authorities have had regarding the UN agencies as well, also the United Nations Secretary General himself. Do you think that could be a possibility
regarding
in this
the
situation?
international envoy? There it can be a very critical question, because then it will give legitimacy according to Israel point of view to what the Hamas has done. Hamas is a non-state actor, but standing on behalf of the Palestinian cause, and Palestinian Authority, that is supposed to be the one who is the government, legal government of the state. But here the authority is also aligning with the Hamas. Now, this is a very critical question. Regarding the international support, we all know that the peace ceasefires, that humanitarian ceasefire that were done through the backdoor peace negotiations handled by the Qatar and many other UAE and many other countries, and in fact the US was also involved. Even the US special envoy's visit or the secretary's visit to the Middle East and others have shown that they are in exchange mission of the views regarding what is happening on ground and what can be done. So this is, but it is actually the provisional measures cannot be a solution to the peace in that area, because this is a region that has been bleeding for more than 70-80 years, and even before that the discrimination. There have been the issues of the two-state formula. Now they're going back, some are saying about the one-state formula and the others. The main important point is that if the aggressor, like in case of India, Pakistan, the Indian occupied Kashmir, if the aggressor is powerful, if the aggressor is tied economically and strategically to the world so-called powers or the real powers in realisticism, so how much weight the international community or the morality can play on ground? So I think this is a dilemma, we all have to live with it.
So you're of the view that provisional measures are not sufficient. That's not what actually is required. Of course, the provisional measures are going to be for a specified time till that final ruling by the ICJ comes in.
Exactly, and even the final ruling of the ICJ, like Ambassador Aizaz has very clearly mentioned, you know, that needs to be respected by the, specifically by the Israel who is acting, you know, in such a discrimination against the human races. And so this is something, if there is no morality that is being observed by the state, how can you imagine that the simple resolution even of the 200 people can work on them?
Right, Ambassador Naela Chohan. Now, there is another article that has been referred to, that is Article 75. The court may at any time decide to examine proprio motu whether the circumstances of the case require the indication of the provisional measures which ought to be taken or complied with by any or all of the parties. What do we understand of this particular? Is it sort of an emergency measure that the court has the option of taking?
It is a provision for emergency measure. But as has been deliberated upon earlier on by Ambassador Aizaz Chaudhry, Foreign Secretary, that it is basically, it is left to the party concerned to accept it, because the West is now using a Russian example where court had decided against Russia in Ukraine war, but nothing was done for implementation. So already there is a precedence for Israel to violate. Therefore, there is no guarantee. But the point here is that the ICJ's ruling will build a strong moral pressure on Israel, on UN Security Council, and the provisional measure that you are talking about under Article 41 would be there. It will give some space, because at this moment winter is setting in. It is extremely cold there. People are dying every day. Lack of food, lack of heating, lack of medical facilities. So to save that, first, that is the first step. Talking about the long term solution of the problem, whether it's a two-state solution or one-state solution, that will be deliberated upon amongst the member countries at the UN, because ICJ is also part of the UN. So it also, its statute is kind of inspired by the charter of the UN.
Right, when we talk about that, there was another very interesting point that was highlighted by Ambassador Chaudhry also. ICJ happens to be one of those 6 principal organs of the United Nations, so as per the charter also. So it has got that very spirit of the UN charter also. So he has also mentioned very interesting fact about the United States putting out to be the member of International Court of Justice, meaning that it doesn't accept to the very legality or the jurisdiction of International Court of Justice. So what makes me curious about this particular phenomenon is that once you are the member of the United Nations Security Council, is it in your hand either not to be the signatory to a certain specific principal organ of the United Nations?
It's a complicated question. Basically, because as you know, UN was established in San Francisco in 1945, and United States of America was one of the founding members and drafters of the charter. Now, it's not that they are not members of it, but they have, it's not that they are not signatories, but they have decided to withdraw. United States is also not contributing to UN as all members are supposed to contribute. They are now not giving any financial aid. They are just saying that we have provided you the land in New York and that's enough of our contribution. So they, you see, because United Nations, when it was established with a certain perspective. Now with so many member states, mainly from Global South, who look at Global North in a different way. The Global North is very insecure. So, they do not want these bodies.
As you mentioned that the not sufficient funding is also coming from the United States when it comes to the functioning of the United Nations and its organs. But at the same time, isn't it ironic it continues to enjoy the privilege of being the veto power at the United Nations Security Council?
Not only that, it uses its umbrella for all its activities. Like if you remember in Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction were supposedly there, and under the UN umbrella they made that invasion. Same goes for Afghanistan. They took ISF forces. UN does not have forces, but again it was under the UN umbrella. So, they have used UN for their agenda. That is very much true. But the question, and I often say that USA and other powers who find now developing countries criticizing them at this platform are not in support of these bodies, while we should be supporting it. We should be working hard for UN reforms to make it more effective, to make it more democratic, while those who have enjoyed power would not want it democratic, because it would affect their monopoly, and also that they cannot pursue their agendas as freely as they could earlier on.
Right. Dr. Shabana, your understanding regarding a country being the member of the United Nations, does it have that very option at the hands to pull out from being the signatory or the member of other principal organs as well, just as the ICJ, specifically talking about the case of America?
Well, in case of America, I think if you read the Charter of the UN and others, the very entry, number one is it is the recognition. That is by the certain limitations, and others, like in case of regime in Afghanistan, it is not recognized as a regime, as a legal state of Afghanistan representative. But once that is done, it is not compulsory on all the members to be a part of all the bodies. Okay. Because at this, if it happens all around, so it will give it a more recognition and the weightage, and then actually it also implies that you are also willing to give a sort of a force element to the United Nations. But yes, the Security Council is, as has been pointed out very rightly, is a very undemocratic now these days, and even earlier. So it needs to be more responsive, it needs to be more constructive, and it needs to be more humane.
When this particular United Nations was being formed and the formation of the principal organs, especially when we talk about the United Nations Security Council with P5 also, what was the logic behind giving that very power of veto to some specific countries, and on the basis of what criteria?
The whole construct of the United Nations, earlier it was League of Nations, and then it was a post Second World War phenomena, and we all know that how the war ended and who were the winners and the losers and how to represent it. So they were basically, the formation after the assembly was that what was the aim? To create, not to let the war happen again. This is the ultimate. And what war? The global war. And why global war? Because the most of the world suffered human losses and the logistic because of that. So at that point, the Security Council was seen as a platform where the certain members, P5, they were supposed to be, creating the peaceful atmosphere for the creation of new states, for giving more voice and the responsibility and more resources to grow. So that was a peaceful agenda, and the UN stands for the peaceful resolution and representation of the nation states. So this is the human, the individual. I cannot be an individual member. The state has to represent me. So this is it. If the US walks out of it, US has not walked out of the United Nations Security Council either. But yes, where are the choke points where they don't agree with it? They either restrain, or they don't attend, or they simply bypass. So this has been the formula that's been going on.
So the principal consideration for giving the veto power to certain specific countries was on a positive note. And yes. As per your understanding, that hasn't been used on those lines of that principle throughout?
Well, it depends which way of the coin you are. For some, like in case of Afghanistan and others, when the war on terror and other resolution, the WTC incident was one of the biggest incident where more than 300 people were killed by the non-state actor. Strike. So that was something, the consensus overall the world opinion was in that favor, and there are many other instances where it has been used for very good, but there are instances where they have been sleeping or deferring, like in case of the Kashmir. There's been although it is being recognized, but it has never been enforced.
Right, Ambassador Naela Chohan, now presumably this particular hearing goes on, and a ruling, as you already mentioned, there are a lot of voices that expect this particular ruling is going to be against Israel at the end of the day. If that happens to be the case, what about those articles which have been mentioned when we talk about the punishment of if that particular onus has been established by the International Court of Justice in its ruling, and it gives certain direction that these should be the measures to hold that perpetrator accountable. When it comes to genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. You already mentioned that the United States of America used the ISAF forces when it came to invasion in Afghanistan. What about the peacekeeping missions of the United Nations? Couldn't they serve as an instrument when it comes to enforcing and implementing any sort of a ruling coming from the highest court of justice?
We are mixing two different things. When it comes to the ruling from the highest body, we know that implementation depends on the parties. So that's one thing. Talking about the peace forces, this has been discussed at the UNGA, but Israel and USA refused any boots on ground, even for ensuring the free flow of humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians. So you can only use blue helmets.
Are there any precedents from the recent historical past that there was such a calamity being inflicted by a certain aggressor on a certain community, and there were certain steps taken by the United Nations in sending in there the peacekeeping missions also to curtail that?
You see, you have to understand what is United Nations, because who sent those forces, who were the donors, what was the interest of the donors, and who were the contributors to the peacekeeping. All these factors have to be taken into account, because it's the member countries who then decide what is in their interest, which brings them to convergence or divergence when it comes to implementation.
Right, Dr. Shabana, your understanding, can peacekeeping missions be used as an instrument if the ruling comes against Israel, which has already been mentioned, that is expected from a lot of voices that if the case goes on, it would definitely be against Israel for what it has
UN
done.
peacekeeping missions are primarily once there is a cessation of the war. And then another point is, it is for the reconstruction and for the trust building and for the training and the capacity building. That's why the Pakistan has been one of the major contributors around the world in the UN peacekeeping missions. East Timor, in Africa, and also many parts, there have been the Latin America where have the are still working on that. So this is something. UN peacekeeping missions does not have a mandate to stop the war. They can act after it has happened.
Right. So, so there is no instrument that happens to be regarding the implementation or enforcement of the ruling when it comes, for example, in this very particular case, if it comes against Israel, and holding those people accountable, which of course happen to be at the very top of the hem, as far as the authorities in Israel are concerned.
Again, I will say that like we have in case of India and Pakistan, we have the UN mandated peace mission that is supposed to be placed, and in case of Pakistan it is placed. Again, depends on the parties if they are willing to host it. India has refused that. In case of the Pakistan, it is more than I think 40 years plus 50, it is still in our part of. So once they are there, the aim is to maintain the basic agreement, like in our case it was the plebiscite. So it has never happened because the the aggressor has never agreed to that. So in case of this, it is a litmus test of the world community, and I really believe that this whole issue of Palestinians and the Israelite war is a litmus test of the nerves of the people of the world. It is no longer the states or the any war. It is a people's war now. The citizens, global citizens are against, whether it is Jewish, Christian, Hindus or whatever, they are against what is being done to the Palestinian. So it is more than simply, and I think recorded history will see how it has happened.
Right, Ambassador Naela, you had some important point to make. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that it really depends on Israel because they also have internal elections coming. And Netanyahu is not a very popular leader any longer, particularly the families of the hostages who criticize that he gave priority to war than to making peace and saving lives. So now in USA also elections are coming. When politicians are under pressure for elections, their stance becomes more flexible. USA, you can see it's more flexible now because in the last resolution in UNGA they abstained. They did not vote against it, they abstained, which meant that it could pass through, which is positive. But with Netanyahu, he thinks that implementing the greater Israel agenda will ensure him his seat, but if you look at how people are reacting, that is not the case. So it's now very complicated, and when you're asking that ICJ has the mandate to do so, ICJ has all the provisions. The point is who's going to implement it and with what fervor, and it also depends what will be the judgment, how will it be drafted. Even if it is in favor of South Africa, there may be many caveats in it which may prevent an implementation.
Ms. Ambassador Naela Chohan, former ambassador and also Special Secretary Foreign Affairs retired, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Shabana Fayyaz, expert in international relations, thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.